So this next interview is just absolutely amazing. It's with Sarsha Hope. She's an aesthetic dancer. She also teaches theta healing. She's also done a lot of embodiment in yoga. So she brings a very unique perspective because it's a very heart perspective to being really aligned with your source and living a path of your spiritual self from a very connected place, if that makes sense.
And, Sasha is one of those people, you'll feel it right away. You're going to feel her presence. You're going to feel, how collected, all those years of just sort of understanding herself and everything, you're just gonna feel it. And that's the amazing thing about Sarsha. When we were on the call, it's just instantly you could feel her poise, you could feel her presence.
I mean, she has a heart full of love, and you'll feel that when you watch the interview. She led us through an amazing meditation during the interview as well. So that's a real treat that you guys are going to love enjoying.
And she's also going to be having a meditation available for us as well that she's actually gifting to us. So, I mean, she's a wonderful, kind, generous soul, and you're going to really enjoy this interview.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And, Sarsha, it's truly an honor to have you here. And thank you for just taking out the time in your busy schedule to just be here with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarsha. You've worked with so many people, and it's such an honor to have this conversation with you and to just help heal the collective and help, spread more consciousness and empower people and heal people. It's such an honor to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, a real pleasure to be a part of this and helping to impact the collective whole. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So we'd love to ask you, what was the most transformational event or series of events that sort of led you towards this journey, and such a unique journey where, you're doing yoga and collective dance, but you're also incorporating, ancestral beliefs and really, healing through those sort of modalities. We'd love to sort of understand what was that, kind of what were the big epiphanies, and as well as kind of the stumbling blocks. We'd love to hear that.
Sure. It's been a journey. So I think one of the first turning points in my life, I've always been interested in spirituality from a very young age. I grew up in New Zealand, surrounded by nature, and have spent a lot of time in nature and always been drawn to anything spiritual. But in New Zealand, 25 years ago, it was very difficult to find anything. And then I've always danced my whole life. Dance has been my biggest passion. And then when I went to dance school, yoga came into my life very strongly. So that was 24 years ago as well. And then at 22, I got married and got pregnant and had a mortgage. So it was I went from practicing yoga every day, meditating every day for an hour, giving birth, and I was in a really good space. Even though I was young, I felt really empowered to move forward in this way. And then, of course, as motherhood took over, as it does, like anybody who's a mother, less and less sleep, less and less practice, more and more financial stress because I wasn't working and my husband was. And I ended up getting really bad eczema all around my mouth, like it was like a scab the whole way around my mouth. It hurt to talk, it hurt to eat, it hurt my ego to be out in public. And at that stage in my life, I was an aerobic instructor. That's what I did. So my job was very public. And that was a real challenge for me. And I tried everything. I tried everything natural. I tried creams. I tried cutting things out of my diet, and nothing really worked until I came back to my practice, until I recommitted to regular yoga practice, regular meditation, and then it just cleared up. So that was when I was about 24 that happened, and it was an experiment, and an experiment that was of great success. It's like, that was a real light bulb moment for me, is these practices actually really work at healing you from the inside out. So that was one of my first journeys. And so then I really threw myself into my path, practicing yoga every day, meditating, and I practiced Iyengar yoga for years and taught Iyengar yoga and practiced Zen meditation. And if you ever come to one of my classes these days, you would see that they're very different from Iyengar yoga. So I had a small home studio when my children were young. We lived off the grid. We grew our own food, very organic. Had a small studio, had private clients. And I had them for about 10 years. And some of these women would turn up every week, twice a week, and it was amazing, and I got to know them, and it was a real gift, and it was a real blessing. But what I noticed was that things weren't changing in their bodies. So no matter, they were coming, they were practicing week after week, but yet things weren't shifting. Their hamstrings were still tight, injuries were still reoccurring. So that really made me question what else is out there, and that's what led me to theta healing, which begins to work with people's belief systems. And then I started to play. I was very lucky to have students that were open-minded enough to play. If we work with clearing these belief systems, then what shows up in the body and how does that change? So that was another really pivotal point of how can I create greater change and transformation in myself? How can I create greater change and transformation in my students? And then we moved as a family. If you know New Zealand, we were living in the North Island. We moved to the South Island, to a beautiful area called Queenstown. It's a international resort town, ski resort. And it was down there that as I said, I'd always danced. Dance was a passion of mine, but it had really been put to the side. I was really practicing and teaching these really masculine practices, what I would call masculine practices of Iyengar yoga and Zen, and very kind of rigid and straight. But I always knew there was something missing. And when I moved to Queenstown, it was this beautiful opportunity. Nobody knew me. So I was like, right, I can teach however I want. It was like this canvas and an experiment. So I really started to dive into the embodiment practices and really listening within. So going from this outward mode of if you do this, if you straighten your arm, and if you put your finger here and lift your leg like that, which is useful for beginners, I became more interested in what happens if I listen to my heart and move from my heart, what unfolds on my mat. And as I started to deepen into these practices and finding more freedom in my body, I started to, and with my theta healing, my intuition was coming online more and becoming more and more heightened. And I got a very clear message to start leading ecstatic dance down in Queenstown. And I don't know about you guys, but I have these, when I get these clear messages, sometimes it's hilarious. I have these big arguments with Source energy. It's like, why do I bother? But it was like, Source was like, I want you to start ecstatic dance. And I'm like, no way, I'm not doing that. That feels way too scary. Who's going to show up? They're not going to dance. I'm not doing that. And it just kept persisting and tapping me on the shoulder and was just like, you need to do this, and it's going to have a greater impact than what you can imagine. So I found the courage in my heart, stepped up, started leading these classes, and pretty quickly they went from having 6 people a week to 30, 40, 50 people a week, and it became a real community. And through the free movement, what I found more than yoga and more than doing as I say, giving people the space to listen to their own body and move from that internal space. I had so many people coming to me after teaching yoga for like 15 years. Within a very short period of time of really diving into free movement, I had people coming to say to me that they'd had their ancestors visit them on the dance floor, they'd had old injuries clear, they'd had past life experiences. It was just phenomenal, just from holding space and inviting people to move. I would always add in an embodiment focus, so it was like a moving meditation, but what would show up? So that's kind of the 3 markers, like stepping onto my path and the experience of like, oh, this really works. And then after years of teaching and practice going, there's something more. And that's when I started to explore the belief work and the ancestral work and working with that. And then even more than that, my soul passion of dance coming back online and sharing and offering that, and how much change and transformation that's made in my own life and in other people's lives. So those three, I can't, boil it down to one, but they're probably my three pivotal moments of shift and change of how I've ended up where I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sarsha. I mean, that's really, really amazing how you went through that journey. For those of us who don't understand that, especially in the Western society, we have the habit of looking at our external reality and our physical symptoms and not understanding that there are beliefs, past experiences, and as you explained, like even ancestral, beliefs and ancestral experiences that we carry within us. Could you just explain how that plays a role in shaping our reality and just creating our day-to-day conditions, including our physical conditions?
So what's happened in the West is there's been this body-mind split. So when science took over from religion, there was a real split, and we started to go much more into the head, and everything had to be science-based. And also around that time, interesting historically, because this happened thousands of years ago, we moved more into a patriarchal model. So not only in the head, but a very masculine, or I'll say patriarchal, driven, goal-orientated society. So very much our focus went out there, and we see that in the reality that we live in. A lot of goal setting, a lot of living out there, a lot of driving. And we forgot about this internal state, which is the feminine is more this internal inner peace, and this split that happened. So it was all in the head as opposed to what's happening in the body. So every time we have an experience, our body is recording that. Like our heart is from, we are literally receivers, perceivers, recorders of reality. So our body remembers everything that is happening in our body. As women, when we have a man enter us, then our clitoris and our yoni remembers that every single time. So our heart remembers heartbreak. But what happens is we can't hold on to it all, and if we haven't built an emotional capacity to process it, the body stores it. Just like the liver might store toxins until we have space and time to be able to process that. It's the same in the body. And so what happens when we do embodiment practices, like really, really embodying. So I've seen many people practice yoga, but they're not in their bodies, because if we've had trauma, it can be really scary actually to be in our bodies. We can move our bodies, we can work out our bodies, it's still that goal setting, but to actually really take the time to deeply go inside our bodies, that's when, and when we do that, it's when these beliefs and these stored emotions start to rise up and we're able to process them. There's also a lot of research and science these days that shows that we're holding 23 generations of genetics, DNA from our ancestors in our body as well. So we have our body recording this life that we're doing. We also have all of the recordings from our ancestors that we're carrying. That yes, if we haven't looked at it, if we haven't worked with it, it creates this reality here. So from a quantum physics level, we are creating reality, and yes, reality is creating us. So if we've got beliefs around not feeling good enough or not feeling worthy, I've worked with hundreds of clients, and interesting enough, it doesn't matter what their story is, there's like these core beliefs that happen in our human conditioning for some reason. And not feeling enough is definitely one of them. And so unless we work with these things, and that's stored in our tissue, it's stored in our body, it's probably been handed down from generation to generation. And unless we work with these things, we keep creating these situations that reflect back to us that we don't feel like we're enough. If we're not able to live in trust, if we're not being able to feel fully at home in our body, relaxed in our body, if we're not able to live in trust, then we create these outer situations. It's like our lens filters reality, and we create these outer situations where reality simply reflects back to us what our belief is. So you can't trust that, you can't trust those types of people, and then it just perpetuates. So it's like this loop. So until we take the time to go from the outward space to connect inward and begin to really dig into the layers, to move, to breathe, to look at what's coming up, what's mine, what's theirs, then we keep creating the same patterns. They're called samskaras in yoga, over and over again. It's like we fall down the same road until we do something different.
Mm.
And these patterns, the samskaras, so they also shape how we're perceiving reality, but from the law of attraction standpoint, are they, if they're not addressed, are they also attracting specific situations to us and specific people?
Yeah, definitely. Because the thing is we're not separate. So on a quantum physics level, on an energy level, everything is energy, right? So below the tissues, below the organs, below the cells, everything is vibrating energy. And so it's like, yes, as much as we're lensing that, we're also putting that out there and we're attracting those energies towards us. So this energetic vibration that we're holding, so I'm not enough, or I don't know how to trust, or I don't know how to be at home, that's a vibration. So below every belief is a vibration, like the whole universe is made up of waves and particles vibrating and coalescing. It's like different radio stations, right? And so what happens is we have these vibrations of these belief systems, and they're like a radio station that broadcasts, and we then attract certain situations and people that want to listen to that same radio station. And then that's how we draw that in. So we're creating that reality as well. We're drawing that into our reality through that vibrational magnetizing into us. Some of you would have noticed what happens is when we begin to shift and change and do this work, it is like we begin to tune into different frequencies, different radio stations, and old people and old paradigms, we just begin to miss them. They just don't show up in our reality. And sometimes that can be sad because there's a part of us that we don't want to necessarily disconnect from that vibration, and there can be grief around that. But that's what begins to happen, is just there's a whole new reality. So I had this experience. I lived in a place called Queenstown when I was 18, 19, 20. And at that point, I was young and I was having fun and partying. And Queenstown's a great town to party in. And then when I went back there 20 years later to live, there was still a lot of the people that I knew from there living there. And it's a small town, like New Zealand's pretty small. And I just never saw them. They just weren't part of my reality. They hardly would, like I was there for 4 years and I would hardly ever see them because I just lived a whole different life. I lived a whole different vibration. So yeah, we shift and change our frequency, we shift and change our beliefs, and then we create and attract a whole different reality.
See, so it's really important to go within because, like, for example, I'll just share an example because a lot of our audience are entrepreneurs as well. So, for example, if we have limiting beliefs such as money is bad or only bad people are rich, beliefs that we don't even know that we carry that may have been passed down from our parents or, ancestrally. Instead of focusing on and being angry and comparing and judging others for being successful, it might be much better to go within and discover those beliefs about ourselves. What is creating our outside world is really our inner world.
Yes, and I think it's important, like, to do both, to have that, yes, to do the more masculine practices of, like, I need to, if we're running a business, I need to show up for this interview on time. We need to do that, but just as much we need to do the more feminine internal practices to change that as well. And not only, yes, ancestral, but past lives. So a lot of us that are on the spiritual path will have past life beliefs and contracts. If you've had in the past, we're living in a very new paradigm where we live spiritual lives in the outside world. So we're living household lives and deeply spiritual lives. So in the past, historically, if you lived a spiritual life, you would go away into a monastery and you would live as a monastic, you would live as a renunciate, and you would also take vows of poverty. And unless you've learnt to clear those contracts and those vows, you will carry them with you from lifetime to lifetime. Yeah, which also, and then we get into this, I want to create abundance, but I shouldn't da da da, and we get into these loop patterns, and then we keep sabotaging ourselves and we don't show up in the same way. So yes, this life, ancestral conditioning, whatever our parents believed around that, but also we can carry past life beliefs and contracts as well.
Sarsha, I'm geeking out so hard at what you're saying. It's so incredibly valuable. I know you are too. So, one thing that, I'd love to ask you, you've had a personal experience. It really sounds like, as you were sharing your story, in your mid-20s, you were basically, you were doing aerobics, and then all of a sudden, like, you had to make a shift. It sounded like you needed to voice something. I mean, it sounded like that way. How important is that truth-telling aspect? I guess, when we say voice, oh, I need to necessarily speak out, but does that really mean with absolute clarity, like if you have negative paradigms, like beliefs that are holding you back, is it really important to articulate it, like as if like really concretely even write it, so that truthfully you know what you're facing?
Yes, definitely. I use a lot of journaling practices, and in my offerings, I use a lot of journaling so that we can really begin to look like what are the programs running in the background. There's that like image in the matrix of the green like lines running in the background. That's what I liken it to. It's like, what are the programmings that are running in the background, and how do we find them? And journaling is a really beautiful way. And also life is our greatest teacher. Like life is the practice. It's like, this is the teacher. We don't need to go to church. Life will show us where we're not able to show up properly, where we need to look at a little bit deeper, where we need to, like you say, really look at that truth and own our stuff around that, and to be really clear with that. What is happening? Why am I creating this? What truth do I need to tell to myself around this? And to be really clear with that. I'm living out of integrity. So this, in my early 20s, what happened was I was living out of integrity. So I'd gone from deep spiritual practice to then not letting my outside life, which I needed to do. I needed to show up as a mother, but letting all of that get over top of me, and I wasn't being truthful to myself. So it was a really beautiful lesson. And how do I come back to telling the truth, to looking at my integrity, to work with my belief systems around, because not only, that's a new paradigm as well, that women can be mothers and have deep spiritual practice. And so looking at those beliefs around that, and I hear many women, I work with a lot of women, I run a lot of feminine embodiment work, and a lot of women, they really give so much of that away when they enter into motherhood. So I had to really work with those belief systems of, I can be a mother and I can have a deep spiritual practice. I can be a mother, a fully committed mother, and I was a real earth mother, and I can still show up and have a spiritual practice for myself as well. It's like finding that balance. So yeah, I had to really look at that truth, write stuff down to clear those belief systems.
So then I guess when you look at, because this is a great subject, so when you look at the whole idea, like, of, I guess, even parenting, even let's just include the dads in, there's all these beliefs, like, our kids come first, our kid, it's almost like an affirmation, like, and I mean, where does that, like, how should that fit in? I mean, because then there's also putting yourself first, right? Up until most parents had kids, I guess we had been putting ourselves first. So, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, especially from the whole, from the respect of mothering, and do you think that could even tie into postpartum depression as well? I mean, could you just help us sort of understand that better?
Yeah, and this is this thing of, as we've talked about, like, what are our own personal beliefs? So for mothers and fathers entering, and what happens is often these beliefs lay dormant until we move into that phase of our life. So I had no idea that I had all these mothering beliefs until I became a mother myself. It's the same with men. They don't realize they have all these father beliefs and the way that they should father and the way that they should show up until they become a father. And so there's and that'll be from their parents, but then we have this collective consciousness as well imprinting on us. So it's like, oh, I'm being told I need to show up in this way. And yes, what happens is when there's not a lot of support, like you mentioned postpartum depression, and I didn't suffer from postpartum depression, but I've certainly seen a lot of women that do, and that is definitely this. We're so conditioned from society to really just give ourselves fully and to lose yourself in it. And it's almost not okay to put your own needs first and your own well-being first. And there's such a loss of, well, who am I now in space and time, that I believe that's what leads to the depression. And there's also not that space, like this thing that we do in the collective of like, I'm pregnant, and women go, that's amazing, and quietly to themselves as mothers they're going, holy shit, you have no idea what you're in for. And that again comes back to that truth telling, that we want to be mindful, right? We also don't want to imprint onto other people, but to be able to hold this truth. And there's just, we really in the West, we're so about, I even see it in the spiritual world of just bypassing and just everything, making it all happiness, and really without holding those deeper containers of truth telling, of women being able to get together and to support other women, not to scare them, but to tell their journeys of what that was like for them, and then being able to support them through that, so that then they can choose, they have a choice, they have agency of like, how do I want to be as a mother, what beliefs do I want to keep perpetuating, because I'm then passing those beliefs down onto my children as well. And I think the same for men. I believe that there's actually a lot more support for women in this day and age than there is for men. I think it's really important that the men start stepping up more and more and being able to hold this, like men stepping into fatherhood, there's even less places for them to go, I'm really struggling with this, I'm finding this really difficult. It's a girlfriend of mine, she made me laugh, she's such a truth teller, and when she had her son, she was like, you go along to kindy and you talk to the mums and they're like, oh, it's amazing, I love it. She's like, they're lying, they're not telling the truth, they don't love it all the time. It's like, you're right, I'm sure you do love it, and then there's times where you're like, this is really difficult. And that's coming back to that truth piece. If you can't own this is difficult, okay, well, what's difficult about it? What is it for you that you're finding difficult? Oh, well, I'm finding this and this and this. Oh, okay, well, where do those beliefs come from? Oh, yeah, my mother was like that, or my father was like that, or that was how my family was. So it's not until we are able to hold that truth that then we can start to look at the deeper layers and reach out for support. And part of my journey and my work is also to create containers of support so that we can move through these rites of passage, these pathways through life with greater ease. And because when we work with these beliefs, we're also changing the future generations of how they feel about being a mother, being a father, or whatever it is that they're moving through.
Yes, absolutely. That is so true, Sarsha. Like, we have a 2.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And
okay.
Yeah.
So you guys know.
Hence the questions, yes. So it was so challenging because there's not just this image of this is what it's like to be a mother, because I've seen my mother and my grandmother and this has been carried down. But now, especially for women and especially for mothers right now, there is so much pressure. I feel there's more pressure than ever before, where it's like, this is how you're a good mother, you must breastfeed and so your child is too, or you must like completely put away everything else. And then there's so much judgment from other mothers where it's like, if you hire a nanny, for example, you're a bad mother. Like I could never hire a nanny for my child who's only like 1-year-old or 2-year-old. But it's really important, and you can touch upon that, are all these beliefs just beliefs that have just existed in society and passed down, and really it's about our own connection with our soul and our source to discover what makes the most sense for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we're moving into the collective conditioning, as we're talking about, like the paradigm that we live in now. So yes, there's our mothers, there's our generations, there's our families, but there's also this collective whole. And yes, I agree. I believe we're living in a time as mothers where there's so much pressure on us, more than ever before, because in the past, not that long ago, our mothers didn't work, or they would work part-time. Like, they had all this time, and of course there was a grief around that, not following their vocation. But it's like, how do we find this balance of working, and not only working, but we've got to have our vocation, we've got to have our purpose, we've got to do attachment parenting, we've got to breastfeed, we've got to be the eco warrior, we've got to be the sex goddess, we've got to be and we've got to fit in our spiritual practice. It's like so much pressure. And then, of course, as we know, with social media, which is a beautiful gift, but it's also this bombardment of, we can tend to only post around the positive and what's happening, and then there's this comparison that happens as well. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And like you say, how do we sit with what works for our own soul? And definitely that's been a journey for me in my life, more and more and more. Is like, what works. I actually just did a post on social media about this last night. The only thing really that you can do is listen to your own soul, because that is the only thing. Like, we have one shot at this life and this time, and there's only one of our souls. There's only you. And if we dampen it, and if we please other people, women, we love to be people pleasers, we love to be liked, we love to fit in. And if we're living our life from that place and denying our deepest truth, our deepest soul truth, that the universe is calling us to show up exactly as we are. Like, we are the artists. We are painting our reality, and we are painting into the collective whole. And it's needed. Our deep truth is needed, not the paper mache, not the, I think this is the way that it should be. But it takes a lot of courage to listen to that. It takes a lot of courage to go, I understand, I've done research about breastfeeding my child to 2, but actually for me, for whatever reason, my child, I'm not producing enough milk. And to honor that, to deeply honor that. It's again that thing of looking at, what's my stuff here? Is there my stuff here? Is this internal piece? And working through that and going, no, this is the way that it is. This is my soul truth, and I'm going to stand in that. But that can be a challenge, right? Yeah. And of course, for the fathers, it's like, I don't want to miss you guys out, right? All the pressures of, like, I've got to provide, I've got to step up, I've got to be the man. It's really difficult. It's really difficult for the men as well. It's such a difficult journey.
Let's just touch upon that foundation, because you really are talking about a family foundation here. Does that really mean to hold sacred space? I mean, it's now all of a sudden, if now, you follow these principles and you make kind of space for yourself, does that mean that this can really mean good things for a relationship as well? Because now all of a sudden, the focus is on each other, right? Not in all these other places where your energy is going. Would you find that holistically, a family can actually come together rather than, going in such separate directions?
Definitely, hands down. It's that, I know from my own journey as a mother, when I would take the time, I would know because especially when you've got young children, they're so still connected to you. They're so energetically, they can feel everything. So I would know when my children were young, it's like, why is my child being unsettled? And it's like, because I haven't been practicing, because I haven't been settling myself. And there's that perfect example of your internal reality affects your external reality. So I would see it within myself. I haven't been practicing, I haven't been grounding with my own self first, and therefore my child's unsettled. Or if I haven't been practicing, I haven't been grounding, I haven't been pouring into my own container, I can't pour into the container of my partner, and I can't be present to them, and then there's disharmony with that, and the children feel that as well. So it's like, yeah, how do we take these ancient practices of this checking in and this foundation of ourself, and how do they feed into a family unit? How do they feed into our children and into our partnership? Something also really interesting I wanted to speak to about that when my children were young, because they are so impressionable by energy. And so what I noticed is, as much as my internal space would impact my child, I would take, say, go visit a friend, and I knew a friend would say have a belief about my child that I didn't feel was real, but I could feel it was really interesting. And I noticed my child would behave the way that that person thought they showed up, because I could see they had this belief. So they're so sensitive to energy, children. So for me as a parent, I had to learn, okay, so how can I protect my child and clear that, so that they're not, because it was like, that's not a normal behavior. It happens to be a behavior that really unusually they do around this person. And then I was like, oh, that's because that person has that belief, and that belief is imprinting onto my child, and my child is going, okay, I'll show up like that for you. It's really interesting. Children are such an exquisite. They're so expressive and they're so sensitive. So it's such a beautiful metaphor of how all of this works.
Yes, that is so true. And we have noticed that pattern with our kids as well. Like they show different versions of themselves according to who they're spending time with. It's like, oh, but they don't usually do this. Why are they doing this right now? It's so fascinating.
Yeah, around like your parents, things like that. It's like the grandparents, and how do they imprint? And so these energetic tools of learning to protect yourself and your child can be really powerful to help with those things.
But then is a part of that also letting go too? Because then, I've seen kind of like the flip side. Now there's like this overprotection. We've come across couples with kids, and all of a sudden they're like, like just voodoo, like on everything, like just completely and now what happens is you become deeply, deeply sensitive to the point where you don't know how to handle I feel like it can crumble resilience too. I mean, do you feel like that there's kind of like that balance too? Like, throw them into the woodwork. It's okay. Or do you feel like it's just, you need to constantly protect?
No, I think there's definitely a balance. And with a child incarnating, because there's also their soul choice as well, and this is something that has really helped me as a parent, of going, okay, this situation right now might not be perfect, but their soul has signed up for that as well, and for their learning, and like you say, for their resilience and for their growth. And there's definitely this trend I've noticed. I mean, my children are older now. My youngest is 13, so I have a 13, 16, and 21-year-old. She just turned 21 the other day. So I'm at that phase. But what I've noticed is definitely, and it's got more and more at the moment, is like you say, this, they call it helicopter parenting, this over parenting, this kind of like, I have to make everything, like you say, protected. And it's not allowing your child and your child's soul to have its own agency and its own learning. So of course it's both, of like, how do we step back and allow them to experience, and how do we be responsible and clear when we need to clear, or how do we just allow them to show up? It's definitely that balance of the outer and the inner, and sitting with what we cultivate within that, definitely.
That's really wonderful. And Sarsha, just going back to because it all, our external reality is obviously created from the inner self. For those of us who, want to really discover these beliefs, past experiences, even ancestral beliefs and patterns that have been carried down, these things aren't so accessible. Now, are there tools? I know you touched upon it briefly, at the beginning with theta healing and aesthetic dance, but could you go into a little bit more detail on how to find the tools and how these tools can help kind of bring it all to surface?
That's a good question, because there's many tools, and what would be useful for your audience to start with. Would you mind if I led a meditation? A
Absolutely.
brief meditation. So one of the things that I've found to be the most powerful transformational pieces on my journey is learning how to tap into source energy quickly and easily, and from that place asking, what are the beliefs that I'm holding? Because it brings us out of our human conditioning, taps us into, we could call it seventh plane, we can call it seventh chakra, but it taps us into source energy, and then we get the clearest message of what is it that I need to work with here. So it's this ability to be able to tune in, and then just simply to ask, like, what is this belief that is holding me back here? Because there's so many different ways, and there's so many different beliefs that we can work on and clear. What I'd also like to add to that, which is kind of like what we've been going through the conversation, is yes, it's really powerful to be able to tap in and to work on these beliefs and to clear them. I did mention journaling is a really important one that I do as well. And embodiment, it just tends to bring these things up. And then you could use this like free movement, and then you could use this meditation. But as also tapping into, taking time to tap in and grow this connection of you as a divine being. Because you can also go down the path, which I certainly did, of trying to fix and change myself all the time. So it's like learning these tools, and they're useful and they're powerful. And also, how do I am, as Rumi would say, I am the universe in ecstatic motion. And the more I tap into my inner body, yes, it brings up beliefs that need to be released, but it also brings me to this divine sense of, like, when I really tap into my heart, like this vast, incredible expanse of this ability to be able to find compassion and to ground into my heart no matter what the circumstance. Or when I tap into the light in my cells, that our cells emanate light. It's like we are light beings, our cells emanate light. And when I tap into that, like that, not just talking about it, but that felt sense, I really understand that I am that. And so I just like to add that it's a balance of the two. It's both. It's working on ourselves, it's this external, but also these practices that also ground us in this reminder that I am a divine being incarnate in human form. Mm. So it's a bit of both, it's like we need to do both. We need to sit in the shadow, we need to say the truth, but we also need to remember these practices, because otherwise we can go down a rabbit hole. And that was certainly my experience of fixing, clearing. So if it's okay, I will talk you through a meditation. Yeah. So we'll bring our hands onto our physical heart. And we'll just so finding a comfortable seat. And just allowing your sitting bones to release and ground down into the support underneath you a little bit more. So finding that relaxation. Just letting your jaws and your eyes soften a little bit. What happens with touch is the tissues will rise to the touch. It's like when we listen to a dear friend, our friend feels held. It's the same with our body. So if you just allow your hand to feel into the beating of your heart, the beating of your heart will rise up to meet you in its power and its tenderness. This heart that is at the center of our being, and embryologically is the first organ to grow. So as we feel this wisdom of the heart, we'll take a moment to ground down into our base again. Imagine that you've got a taproot down into the earth. grounding ourselves down, down, down. And just like any tree or plant that roots down, there's this reciprocity of the earth. As she pushes back up through every blade of grass, she pushes back up through us, through our spine. And that anchoring into the heart. We're going to expand out through the heart space. So imagining from the sides of your heart that you're expanding out and filling the space of the room that you're in. And then feeling your heart expanding out to the whole of the home and the surrounding area of your home or wherever you are now in space and time. And expanding your heart out so it's filling and expanding the country that you live in, that you're in. Keep expanding your heart out, 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 imagining that you're reaching out to the farthest reaches of the universe, right out to the void, and from the void, right out. You're connecting into that pure, white, pearly, iridescent light, that source, vibration, light energy. And from this place, I want you to bring into your mind something that you're finding challenging in your life at the moment. A resistance, an issue, a person, or a situation that you're wanting more clarity on. As you hold that in your mind, just get clearer and clearer on the intention. So when we're asking, we want to be really clear in as few succinct words as possible. And you simply ask, and you very clearly ask, Source, show me what is the belief in me that is helping to co-create this situation. And then you just notice what information, and we all gather information differently. It might be a feeling, it might be an image, it might be words. Just noticing what you get, and that what you get is right for you. And it's always good to offer your gratitude and your appreciation for the information you've received. And bringing yourself back, allowing your heart to soften back in, back into the container of your body. And take a moment to ground down into the earth again. And from that grounding down into the earth, rising the energy back up to your heart space. can let your hand rest down, and in your own time, in your own space, just quietly opening your eyes. So as I said, there's many, many tools, but going directly to the source is one of the most potent and powerful ways that I've found. And then you can journal on that, and you could maybe move with that and notice where it is in the body. There's a whole process, but that is a really simple, easy way that you can start with.
It's very effective.
Yeah, very powerful. And the answer was received so clearly.
Beautiful. Right, when we get the human, it's like the human conditioning out of the way, because we've also, when we're asking, we have all the ancestral and genetic conditioning, and so that's why it's useful to go straight to source and go, okay, what is it in me? What belief in me is creating this?
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for this. This has been so incredibly valuable. We're gonna have to get you here, like ongoing. Like we have to have you, like, because this has been such incredibly valuable information.
Thank you so much, Sarsha. And Sarsha, anyone in the audience wants to get in touch with you and also, work with you or learn more about what you do. What's the best way that they can do that?
So you can either find me on my website, www.sashahope.com, or my Facebook page. My business page is Hope Wellness, and sending me a message on Messenger is probably the best way to contact me if you're wanting to book in. So I offer private sessions online that work with people's belief systems. I also sometimes add in embodiment practices with that. So that's the best way to contact me. You can email me through my website. There's a form, or you can just contact me through Messenger on my Facebook page, Hope Wellness.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarsha.
So much. This has been incredibly valuable.
We're so grateful for everything you shared.
It's absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm passionate about sharing this work. It's so important.
Thank you. Thank you.